Hey, welcome back to Engineer's Workshop. I'm over here at the new table saw, the Rockwell 12 to 14 inch table saw. I've got it set up on a pallet jack where I can do a forward and back, and above it I have the 3-ton overhead crane where I can do side to side, so I could get the tabletop assembled, flipped over, and put in place here. You ever get to a point where you got too many non-functioning or non-working projects? I mean, if I look around the shop here, I've got the Monarch lathe, I've got the steam engine, I've got the Miltronics Partner 4. Too many things that aren't working, and I don't want this to be one of them. I always have to have a working table saw, and this is going to be replacing my Beach 18-inch rolling top table saw that's over in the small barn. So I'm going to get this thing quickly cleaned up, aligned, address any issues that it has, reassemble it, and then that way I can be ready to drop this thing on the small tilt bed trailer. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on right on the pallet jack on the trailer. Then when we take that over to the small shop, we can just tilt it, ease it down with the come along, and just take it right from the trailer bed into its final home. So basically when I'm done with this, I can take it directly over to the small shop, roll it into place. So let's get some cleanup work done on this, get the caked on sawdust removed out of some of these areas, and I'll show you a couple of things I discovered about the saw itself and what needs to be addressed. It's interesting, they used fine thread bolts for attaching the table extensions. There's no grade markings on them, so I don't understand the logic behind that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to align the edges of the tables as well as I can, and this is the infeed end, so I'm going to make sure that this is flush and that the table surfaces are flush by clamping 1, 2, 3 blocks underneath. That bolt can come out. Bolts that go into the casting are coarse thread. I like these clamps for stuff like this because I can bridge across 2 surfaces and push down against one surface on the bottom. One thing I'm noticing, I'm very flush here on the edges, but the center table is sitting high relative to the wings. So if I am to adjust that, I would need to go in and loosen the center 2 mounting bolts, see if I could thump this down That could be very, very interesting. But try to get these flatter along more of their length, because once this is bolted to the top of the saw, these couple of these bolts are not accessible. So if I need to make any adjustments, I need to do that before it's mounted up. Okay, I have a slight alignment issue. I use the 1, 2, 3 blocks to flush things up at the two ends. But here in the middle, the main table sits higher than the auxiliary tables by, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 thousandths. So I rigged up a ratchet. Let me show you what I did on the underside with a 24-inch piece of 2x. And what I'm doing is I'm pushing up on the center of the extension wing. I loosen the 2 attachment bolts in the middle. I'm going to tighten this. I'm going to see if I can pull this flush. Just a little bit of force. Oh boy, it works very nicely. That's actually too much. I'm going to have to I'm going to have to hold the ratchet. I think what I'm going to have to do is snug these just a little bit, and then find that magic point where it'll kind of hold itself in place. It's damn near perfect. I'm not going to argue with results. Just lock it down. Good enough for woodworking, right? I'll just repeat that on the other side. One of the first things I wanted to check was run out on the face of the arbor, and it's pretty good. I've got what I would call a low spot here. It pretty much is 0 all the way around, except for that one area. So it's not like the whole surface is cocked, but I think there might have been maybe some local impact or something at that point. Not enough for me to take it off and go after it. But, you know, ideally, this could benefit from removing it, putting it in the lathe between centers and refacing that. For now, I'm going to leave it as is. And of course, the reason why you want this running as true as possible is, you know, on a 2.5-inch diameter, if you're out a thousandths at the diameter of a 12 to 14-inch saw, you're out 10, 12 thousandths, so you don't want that. But I'm also not convinced that when a saw blade is running at its rated RPM out here, the centrifugal force, if the edge of the blade is pulled in 10 thousandths, it wouldn't take much for the centrifugal force to pull that distortion out to where it's completely straight. The saw actually has a thrust bearing here to aid in lifting the trunnion, but there's a little bit of play between that thrust bearing and the front of the saw. I'm going to try to slide the worm on the shaft. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. That's the only way that I see to remove that play. Well, there's no sliding because that's a roll pin. So, can I move the hand wheel on the shaft? Here's the clearance I'm talking about right in there. Nope, that looks like that's a roll pin too. So the clearance is what we've got. Another issue that we have, which is difficult to see, is the alignment of the motor relative to the axis of the spindle is not good. It's actually cocked, I believe, upward. So I need to loosen the motor and get the axis of the motor and the axis of the saw more well aligned. The relative tension between one side of this and the other is not good, and you want that to be uniform for a flat belt. The other thing I need to adjust out, if you'll notice, is there's a gap here at that locking collar, and evidence that it has slid on the shaft. There's a balance point when the trunnion assembly goes from, being held up to pushing, and then that entire shaft slides in and out. So I want to get the locking collar up against the shoulder that it's supposed to bottom against and take that play out. Not sure if there's one set screw or two. Appears to be just one. This should really be a two-piece clamp collar. Something that'll grip the shaft good without digging into it. Now this hand wheel has a set screw. Actually, I suppose the other one does too. Okay, so we tightened up the gap here. We've tightened up our gap on either side of the tilting shaft, and this clamp collar was just completely loose. So now there's no play on that shaft either. I think I'll lube up all the pivot points, and then we'll move on to the motor. Okay, you can see from a point where the top attaches. We're not perfect, but we're, let's say, touching the left line on level. And with the saw arbor tilted all the way up, we're at the same point. Now if I put this level on the motor itself, you can see where that bubble is. It's beyond the level, so the back end of this motor needs to come up quite a bit. Probably should take the motor cover off, and that'll be easier to get at it then. Okay, I've got my VFD jumpered in directly to the motor leads, and I'm set it up for 30 hertz because this is a 7.5 horse motor, and I've only got a VFD capable of 5 horse, so I don't want to overtax it. Sounds pretty good. Let's go up to 60 hertz. No issues there. Let's try with a blade. The 12-inch blades that came with this were bored out to this monster size, so you have to put on a spacer to even run these. Okay, fire in the hole. Wow, I'm impressed. Seeing no issues, I believe I will put the top on. Now, to use a saw like this for cross-cutting, you have to have a proper miter gauge. And as I mentioned in my last video, these slots were not 3/4 by 3/8. They're 1 inch with an 1 1/4 T. And so I found this beauty on eBay, paid dearly for it. This is the correct miter gauge for this saw. I think this thing was out in a field and they beat it out of the slot that it was in, but the areas that are the important areas at least work. So time to clean this up a little bit. And continue to set the saw up. We need to set the blade to be a perfect 90 to the table. And we need to set the travel of the miter gauge. In other words, when we are working wood, we want that to be parallel to the axis of the blade. And there is a trick to doing that. So I will show you that in a minute here. I am re-engineering one aspect of this design. They had this cover held on through the 4 mounting holes with these long flathead screws and a standoff, and then that was bolted into the back of the saw base just with a nut. I don't know how you're supposed to take those on and off. I guess you're not, with the tabletop in place. So I'm replacing them with some standoffs. And what I'm going to do is set the length of these, bolt them into the back of the saw base, load the front cover on, and then use acorn nuts on the front so that this thing can come on and off when I need to adjust the belts or clean out inside. So one departure from manufacturer's original design. Okay, there's my reference height. Just got to set the rest of them to that. For grins, I'm going to check the run out of the blade. I don't think you're going to be able to see this. $10. Back to 0. It's about 10 thousandths. So if we get 1 at the arbor, we get 10 at the blade, at the tip of the blade. Makes sense. Next thing we have to do before we align the tabletop to the travel, to the squareness of the blade, is we need to set our 90-degree stop. And I'll tell you what, that looks to be about dead nuts. Maybe no, that's pretty doggone good. It could go a hair more, just a hair. Let's see if I can get at that adjustment. I actually took it the wrong way the first time. Now, to align the tabletop to the Arbor, I clamped two combination square blades into the Arbor. One's just to balance it, but this effectively extends the throw of the saw to about 12 inches. And I am just grazing the indicator at this side. But I've got quite a bit of engagement at that side, so I need to move the table away from the blade. Opposite move on this side. It's about 5/1000ths engagement. That's about 5/1000ths engagement there. It's that moment of truth time where we ask ourselves, does it cut? So we will find out. Just got it set up slightly deeper depth of cut than the thickness of a 2x4. Cut off a couple of slices. I know I do not have an insert, so we're going to have to be careful with what we try. Not bad for a rip blade. I'll slice a couple more off. So a 12-inch blade comes down about maybe a ½ inch below the level of the tabletop. A 14-inch blade would not. It would still be sticking up. My 14-inch blade is covered with goop, so I'm going to have to get one of those cleaned off before I try it out. Let's try cutting this vertically. Pretty sure I have enough depth of cut even with a 12-inch. Well, I hope you enjoyed seeing a quick tune-up, refurbishment, and reassembly of the table saw. I'm pretty excited. This thing, I mean, it reminds me a lot of the Unisaw. Bigger, of course, a little bit more capability. I'm not quite done. I do need to put a start-stop switch on here. I've got a nice one with Allen Bradley push buttons, e-stop, push to start, and then a lighted pilot light. I think I'll put that here. This thing has liquid tight conduit in here. I might replace these with like a Boss Flex you know, drop cord style to go into the motor, because these are just really old and crusty, and it really doesn't need to have that kind of protection. So might change those out. But yeah, I'm really happy. Did a quickie refurbishment of the miter gauge, so that'll get me cross-cutting. I did not get a rip fence with this, but I've got an idea to make my own out of 80-20 extrusions going across the front and then front to back. So that'll be a later project, but you know, this is pretty much ready to go. I do need to make a table insert. I'll make that out of a hardwood, probably oak, and put set screws in it so that I can perfectly level it with the surface of the table. So hope you enjoyed it. Got to get back on the accessory drive components for my son's Spitfire project. He's getting close to putting all that stuff together, so need to get the lathe back up and get some of those accessory drive components going next time. So thanks again for watching. Weather's turning beautiful. It's kind of nice to be able to work out here in short sleeves. So we'll see you again next week, and until then, as always, stay safe.